Ukraine, and I will maybe tell you a little bit about that lady a little bit later when you start falling asleep when I'm talking about Job. I'm going to tell you some stories. Okay.
For not very good dreams.
Pardon me?
I said Job doesn't make for very good dreams.
No, but actually it's a great book. And okay, a little bit about myself. My most important relationship is with Jesus Christ. That's not a given, but that is, by God's grace, the truth. The next best thing you need to know about me is my relationship with my wife, Christine, over there. And you'll hear, hopefully, from her during the meals and the breaks and so on, get to know her. She's a great young lady. What day is it today? What's special about today?
It's Pi Day.
It's
Pi.
spring.
Pi Day. Yeah, well, more importantly than Pi Day, it is Christine's birthday. She was born on Pi Day. We have a colleague who runs the Torchbearers Bible School in Costa Rica, and he has a daughter named Jaina. Jaina was born with curvature of the spine, had to have surgery, and the surgery didn't go very well. And she will never be able to really walk again, at least not completely. And yet Jaina has a wonderful spirit. She loves the Lord, and she loves Pi Day. And so down there at the school where she goes in Costa Rica, she decided to try to set the record for how many places, decimal places you can recite pi. And she did 1,000. And we have a recording of it, and she just went through 1,000 places like that. So she'll do well in life. Good to be here with you. And what I'm going to do, instead of talking about myself, which I don't like to do anyway, I'm going to give you an opportunity in each class to ask me 2 questions. It can be about the material, it can be about Christine or me, our life, or whatever you want, so that you get information that you want rather than me stuffing down, my having moved 35 times in my life, lived in 9 different countries, so what? That's not that important. But good to be here. I will tell you that this is my favorite type of crowd, and I don't like crowds. But Christine and I worked at a Torchbearers Bible School in Sweden for 15 years, and this is like going back in time. We retired or semi-retired 3 years ago, and it's good to be back home again. So let me see what's going on here. I have notes for you. I tend to be a content-heavy, content-heavy lecturer. So if I get too much content and you want to talk, I love questions, so please stop me. Let's discuss. Because it's more important that you are formed into Christ's image during this class rather than just being informed about things that you may not or may know. Okay? So, Job. Probably, well, it is the oldest book as far as we know, the oldest book in the Bible. And I do have notes. Sorry. Let's pass these out. I tried to leave a little room for you to take some extra notes on these pages or on the back or however you choose to take notes. And then I will make my slides. If you want the slides on top of it, I'll make those available to you in a PDF file at the end of the week. Or you can do the modern thing, just take out your iPhone and take pictures of the screen. First time I saw that people do that, I said, what in the world are they doing?
If they take like 2 steps backward, they can see the screen.
Does that work? Good. Job is the oldest book in the Bible, according to the experts, and perhaps one of the oldest books in the world of literature. And when God began to speak to his creation through his word, he doesn't give us a book of laws. He doesn't start with an explanation of theology. He doesn't begin with 4 basic steps to becoming a Christian. He starts by telling a story. God knows we all love a good story. And if God blesses you someday to have children of your own, and then to have, if he super blesses you someday, that you have grandchildren of your own, you will find yourself telling them a lot of stories. And I can tell you from personal experience that grandchildren want to hear stories about their grandparents. My grandsons keep pestering me. Morfar, that's what they call me. That's grandfather in Swedish, because my wife is Swedish. Morfar, tell us a story. So what kind of story should I tell my grandchildren? Their grandsons, 4 boys. Any ideas? What kind of a story would excite a young boy?
Battle stories.
Battle stories. That's it?
Well,
Adventure.
Cars.
Cars. Yeah. Yeah. My experience is that my grandchildren want to hear stories of grand adventure, of overcoming huge challenges, of escaping danger, of being heroes. They want to hear stories that are true, which is interesting, but at the same time, kind of bigger than reality, bigger than true. How I spent my day yesterday is not the story they want to hear. They want to hear something much grander than that. Once upon a time. They want to hear stories about danger and monsters and being delivered from danger and monsters. And watching what you guys are watching downstairs, it seems like you guys are still little kids. When you watch a movie, I think your first thought isn't, is this true in terms of facts? That doesn't seem to be your priority. You're asking if it tells a story that leads you and carries you into the story. Can you imagine that to be true in your own life? I noticed that some of you were watching Hunger Games. Can some of you imagine being Katniss? That's what attracts you to that story, to that movie. So would your life make a good movie? If not your entire life, maybe some period in your life? What story would you tell if you had grandchildren or children today? Is there a particular experience? Are any of you maybe, do you have an idea for a movie based on your life? Kurt Vonnegut was a well-known American writer of the previous generation, or maybe 2 generations ago, I'm not sure, but his most famous novel was entitled Slaughterhouse-Five. It was a war novel from World War II. And in an old video that you can watch on YouTube, Vonnegut famously drew the shapes of typical storylines on a blackboard. I'm going to use a whiteboard here. And his thesis was that every story that's ever been told that really captures our imagination has essentially the same shape. What shape do you think that might be if you haven't already looked at your notes? Don't look at the notes. What shape do you think a storyline would take? Yeah. Triangle? Explain.
Your rising actions, your 5 actions, and your fall.
Okay. So it ends with a fall. Boy, that would be like a French movie. Always ends sad.
That's fair.
Hollywood. Take Hollywood. Someone else want to give it a try? What's your story look like?
Maybe like a redemption arc with a good character who doesn't have a lot going for him, maybe overcomes some great obstacle that no one else could, and then it ends with everybody living happily ever after.
Yeah, there you go. And the shape of that, we'll look at it here. This is what Vonnegut does. He draws 2 axes, and here he has good fortune, excuse my handwriting, here, ill fortune, and here's the beginning, here's the end, and I'm running out of ink. Okay? So, and he takes the story of Cinderella. Where does Cinderella's story start? Between ill fortune and good fortune? No, actually not. She seemed to have come from a good family. Well, let's put her at least in the middle here somewhere, okay? And she had a father and a mother. Her mother dies. And things start going downwards. Then her father remarries. And he remarries this evil stepmother, right? And she inherits 2 evil stepsisters. And they take advantage of her, and she is way down here at the bottom, right? And then what happens? Her father is already dead, so she's down there. She's living with her stepmother and her stepsisters. What happens then?
She gets to go to the ball.
Gets invited to the ball, yeah, okay. Starts going up. And what happens down here to make it go up? You know, there is the fairy godmother, right? We all need a fairy godmother. Well, she got one down there, someone to rescue her. And she starts going back up. And then she meets a handsome prince, and the clock strikes 12, and what happens then? Yeah, as Kurt Vonnegut says, it doesn't take long for a clock to strike 12, and she's down. Even worse than before, because she's just experienced great happiness, and now all of a sudden she's lost it all. But then, of course, what happens next? There's no fairy godmother. What comes in? There's the prince. Okay, there always has to be a prince. And then she's back, and then happily ever after. So this is really 2 episodes very quickly tied together there. But they are in the shape of a U. Start off at least, normal, if this is normal, but in many cases better than normal. You drop down to the lowest of the low, and then a savior comes, and all of a sudden you're back up again. And I think I just got ahead of myself on that, but that's the story. So you take any chick flick, any, superhero movie, and that's basically the shape. And that's going to be, just so you know, probably the shape of your life as well. Series of ups and downs. And we're going to find out that it's in those downs that the real action takes place. That's where God is really beginning to work in your life. That's where the Savior comes in. Whether it be the fairy godmother or the prince is when you are down. Okay? This is Bible school. This is not fairy tale stories here, and this is not the movies. So why do you think I'm telling you all of this? Stuff that you instinctively already know. Because way before Cinderella, way before Princess Bride, way before Lord of the Rings, there was an author who designed our whole creation to understand, to be attracted to, and then to even live out the series of U-shaped stories. Stories of danger, stories of disaster and disappointment. I think you all can already tell some of those stories, but stories also of salvation. And that author, in the person of his divine Son, even entered our world, our story, by living out his own U-shaped story. And so as we come to the story of Job, we're going to see that Job's story, what do we know most about Job, is how he suffered, right? We know the bottom of Job's story, but that wasn't his whole story. And his story, his U-shaped story, is pointing to the ultimate U-shaped story of Jesus Christ. Yes, you can see Jesus in the book of Job. One of the things that you may not have fully realized yet is, and because you're still, but relatively at the beginning of your life story, but stories are what make us. And it's mainly our difficulties, the bottom of the U, that form us as we overcome them. And if you ask anyone who has gone through a life-changing difficulty and has been transformed by that experience, they're going to say, well, I wouldn't necessarily want to go through that again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Even people who have gone through tremendous struggles to addictions, drug addictions and other kinds, and have made it through the other side, they'll say, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to make choices that are going to land me in that bottom. But God met me there, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Any of you had such experiences? Maybe not the real deep ones. I'm sure you've certainly had these U-shaped events. And we don't want to admit this. I don't want to admit this, because suffering is not fun. But suffering makes us. It forms us. It forms our character. It forms our wisdom. It forms our patience. It forms our determination, our purpose. It even forms our joy, as we can look back at those events and see, boy, even in the valley of the shadow of death, God was with me. You can't really fully understand joy without suffering. And in Job's case, it also defined his relationship to God. So again, I'm going to ask you, what's the story that you would tell your children or your grandchildren? Which story do you think you would tell from your life? And I forgot to go through any of my slides here. So while you're thinking about that, let me just go through here. Okay, there's a grandfather telling some stories. And God is a storyteller, the best storyteller there is. And he loves to tell us the story of Jesus. What story would you tell from your life to your children? You don't have to give me all the ins and outs, but what would it look like? Do you have a story? I think you do. Cooper?
One of the biggest ones I think that I would tell them, just the overlying point would be time is more valuable than anything else.
Time.
Yeah, like valuing time with people, with what you do, with how you spend it. And I have a lot of stories and life events in my own life that have made that apparent to me.
Okay. Stories. Okay, I'll pick on Rick. Sure. You're in this class.
I've got a million stories. Getting fired from church was one of the stories I tell about.
And why is that important to you?
Because I have no way to support my family or anything else like that. And so it was like, it was a surprise, totally flat out, broke, no real prospect for anything coming. And it's what launched PCF.
And we men generally find a lot of our identity in what we do, and when you're deprived of what you want to do, that can be devastating. Yeah. Yeah.
I tell them the story of me at Bible school.
It's that bad, huh? No, I'm kidding. Okay, what would you tell about Bible school?
Adventures, good times I've had. Tell them about the great things I've learned.
Okay, good. Do you think they'd be interested?
I think I can make it interesting.
Yeah, you make a very good point right there. We're going to get to that. Stories are made to be made interesting, I think. Yes?
I think if I had grandchildren one day, I would tell them the story of how I met my family.
You want to hear how I met Christine?
Sure.
I sat next to her my first Sunday in church in Sweden, and it was all up from there. Actually, she hates when I tell that version of the story because she says it took a lot longer to win my heart, but she's a friend of my sister who had moved to Sweden before me, and we actually did meet in church. I sat right next to her the first Sunday in church, and it took a few years after that for me to finally convince her to marry me, but yeah. Okay, any other stories? The waiting, that was hard. Yes?
I tell my grandkids, my kids, the stories of all my death experiences.
Your near?
Like my near-death experiences.
Near-death experiences.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have one that you can shortly tell us?
The one when I was hit by a car.
Ooh.
That one was fun. I was like in 4th grade. Then I had one whenever I almost died of like multiple asthma attacks. I had to be hospitalized a lot of times. Then I had some going on like hikes where I could have like fallen off a cliff, but I didn't. So.
Now, when you tell that story, you wouldn't tend to exaggerate or anything, would you?
Oh no, I went to exaggerate. Like whenever I say whenever I was hit by a car, I'm like, I went higher than the telephone poles. I didn't go that high, but I really did almost die. Like the doctors thought I was gonna be dead. Like I should have died.
Yeah, that's a good story. A little bit of sanctified exaggeration, to make your story. When I tell a story to my grandsons, the facts that I tell them are true because I'm not a liar, but that's not what really fascinates them. It's when I take true facts and then maybe emphasize certain aspects of that story, the danger, the scary parts, the unexpected, and then the fortunate ending, like you. That's what draws them into my story. And that's a little bit of sanctified exaggeration. If you're going to be a missionary ever in life, you have to take a story and make it bigger than life. Okay? I may not tell my story in the correct chronology. I may skip over a lot of details. I will use emotion to emphasize certain aspects. So, in the end, is my story true? Yes. But is it exactly what happened in terms of time and all the details? Obviously not. Or else my story would be as long as the event itself and it would be boring. So the power of a good story is that it gives you greater meaning than the mere events that happened. Do you understand? You're not lying about it, you're giving them facts, but a good story is going to take them beyond just the mere facts of the story. All great stories are more than the story itself. And God is the world's best storyteller. And his stories grab us. We don't have everything that happened to everybody in the Bible. We just hear certain key stories and key events to draw us, to attract us, to challenge us to enter that story. Did you ever think about how little we actually know about Jesus in terms of his daily life and routine? It's not that Jesus' life was boring, like my life would be to my grandchildren, but God's purpose in telling us the story of his son through the writers of the Bible is not to tell us what brand of toothpaste Jesus used, or if he even brushed his teeth. And Jesus more than likely didn't brush his teeth. Ew. But that was the culture of the day. It's to give us the details and the events and the emphases that are going to truly change our lives. And what toothpaste Jesus used is not going to change your life. And he doesn't want us to be distracted by those details. He gives us what is truly important for us. And the story of Jesus is the greatest story ever told. And I believe, so you don't misunderstand me, that every fact we have in Scripture about the life of Jesus is absolutely true. But I would add, it is also more true than the mere facts. Because it invites us to enter into his story and have our lives transformed by the reality of Christ's life. Okay, this is a long introduction to Job. I'm not quite even finished yet, but it's important to understand if you're going to understand Job, and really if you're going to understand the Bible. And so God tells us the story of his only son, comes to earth, okay? He's in heaven, he comes down. It's always that picture of coming down, coming down. It's not that heaven is somewhere up there, but it's just for us to understand the storyline. We consider down being, in the valley, trouble, difficult, and Jesus came down. Being born of a virgin, he shows this deep and really unexpected love for the outcasts and the canceled people of his day. And then he was canceled himself, put to death by the very same people that he came to love and save. And then triumphantly rises from the dead and ascends into heaven. Wow, what a story. And it has that familiar echo to it because we're attracted to those stories. It's a story that takes us beyond the facts, true facts of Jesus' life, and gives us hope that we can somehow connect to that story. We can live in that story. Just like when you're watching a movie, you're imagining yourself being part of that movie. And then the great part about it is that Jesus can actually live his story, continue to live his story through each one of us and in each one of us. Now, missionaries who go to the most forgotten places of the world, my sister is one of those, and they work among people who have never heard about Jesus. They find that people instinctively connect to the Jesus story, and that even from their own tribal legends and their culture, the same basic story elements are familiar. I remember when we were working in Sweden, we had a summer school session, and I heard one of the most gripping and convincing testimonies that I've ever heard. It wasn't long. An Wang was one of our summer students that year, and he was from China. And some of his classmates had become Christians and shared the gospel story with An. He had never heard of Jesus before, never heard of him. But he said that after hearing about Jesus for a few months from his friends, he decided to become one of Christ's followers. I asked him, An, how could you make a commitment to Christ without ever previously even heard of Jesus? How could you take that step? And he answered simply, the story rang true. That was his testimony. The story of Jesus rang true. The story that had already been planted by God deep in An's heart connected with the fulfillment of that story in Jesus. And it just rang true. He says, this is whom I've been looking for. And An became part of the Jesus story. He's married now, back in China, and living for the Lord living his story through him. Wow, that was encouraging to me. So as we look at the story of Job, we should also be looking for hints of the story of Jesus. And that, by the way, is what you should be doing throughout Scripture. You should be, as you're reading through the Old Testament, it's great that you're reading through the Bible. Look for hints to the story of Jesus. You're not going to find it, plainly printed out like in the Gospels, but you're going to, as you look for it, you're going to see more and more hints. And as you do, you're going to just really get excited about your discoveries. Because God loves to tell the story of Jesus, and it's baked into the story of Job. Just so you know, some of the sources, I don't know if I have a slide for this. Anyway, there's Cinderella and blah, blah, blah. Okay, I wanted to get to the list of sources. These are some of the sources I've used, just so you know. We all use sources when we're going to teach. We have to learn just like you guys have to learn, and I'm still learning about Job. Wisdom of the Cross is a great book by a British author, commentator, Christopher Ash. I listened to a whole series of lectures on Job by Dr. Derek Thomas. I think he's from Britain originally, but works in South Carolina. Some kind of interesting discussions about Job by a guy named Paul Vanderklay and Jess Purviance. And then just a lot of articles. Eric Ortland, if you ever want to find some good stuff on Job, he's a great guy. And many others. Okay. How are we doing? Ready for the story? Yes. Okay. Let's start. Well, I still have to do some more introduction because Job is a big book. It's a tough book. It's actually the toughest book in the Bible, I think. So this is not, elementary Sunday school type material. This is hard.
We just went through Ecclesiastes. I think we can handle it.
Yeah, he set you up, Dan Thomas. By the way, Dan, we used to know when he was just a little kid. He was sort of the age of our daughters. Anybody know what this painting is? Give you extra credit. The Scream. Who painted it and what country? Nope. It's a Scandinavian country, from a Scandinavian country, and it's not Sweden.
Scandinavia.
Nope. It's from Norway. Edvard Munch from in the 1890s. He painted that. Do you ever feel like that? I just want to scream. Where is God when I want to scream? Many people mistakenly think that Job is where you can find everything you always wanted to know about suffering and the problem of evil. And they end up, after they read through the book, frustrated, disillusioned when they find out that instead of nice, tidy answers about the problem of evil and suffering, they're just more confused by the time they get through this long book. And they come to the end, and it doesn't even seem like it's an end at all. So where is God when I just want to scream? And we ask these questions. Does God really care about my pain? Is there a reason for my suffering? How is the story going to end? And we're all hoping for that Hollywood ending. The problem of evil basically revolves around the question of how can a good God allow suffering and evil in this world? But actually, Job is not really the book where you're going to find answers to that big question. By the way, if you're going to study why is there so much evil in the world, the problem of evil, how about also studying why is there so much good in the world, the problem of good? Where does good come from? We blame God for evil, so where does the good come from? Maybe we're a little confused as to where evil comes from. Okay? So anyway, that's just a little hint if you're going to be studying that question. So, is it where you're going to find out everything you always wanted to know about evil? No. Is it dedicated to answering the theoretical question as to why a good God would allow pain and suffering? We're going to get a good theoretical answer? No. But the book of Job does deal with real life suffering. That's obvious. And real life questions about God's fairness, justice, and goodness. And Job asks a lot of questions about that. So, yes. And the book of Job does point to the final answer to our pain and suffering by pointing us to Jesus Christ. And that's why we need to look for Jesus in the book of Job. So yes on that one too. Let's say your little brother or sister, God forbid, is killed by a drunk driver. And I don't know you guys, maybe it's terrible even to entertain that thought, especially if somebody here has experienced that. I don't know. But even if you haven't experienced that tragedy, you can imagine the pain, the horror, the questions, the doubts that you might have as a result of that. And you might ask the question, my little brother, my little sister, they were innocent. Why was that person killed? Why not somebody who deserves it more, like the driver? What's your reaction? What do you think Job's reaction would be? And he suffered a lot more than just losing a brother or sister. What's a natural reaction for somebody who's going through that? Let's be honest.
Why?
Why? What kind of emotion, though? That's a question we ask, but anger. Is anger justified in this case? Be bold.
I think so.
You think so? Are we allowed to be angry?
I think depending on where you take the anger, like if it's a healthy, righteous kind of anger, then yes, because God feels angry. So I think in certain times there's a time for us to be angry as well, but you can definitely take it to be unrighteous anger.
Is there not a verse that says, "Be angry and do not sin"?
If, boy, this is going to sound terrible, but if somebody hits on my wife, do I have the right to be angry?
Yes.
I heard a definite yes from my wife over there. I would be wrong not to be angry. That would be my sin. Would it not? If I didn't step up to protect my wife's honor, and it would take some anger to motivate me, because as far as I recall, I've never punched anybody out, but I would punch one of you guys out, okay? So stay away. You realize I'm kidding about you guys, but anger is definitely a good emotion, often abused, especially by us guys, but it's part of who God is, and all of who God is good, and God is an angry God when it's justified to be angry. And so a proper response in certain circumstances is definitely anger. You want to argue with me? I'm more than willing to hear your side. Colby.
I'm just curious, do you feel like anger is something you choose, or because like obviously there's an emotion that just comes up, so do you feel like you have to choose the anger for it to actually be like your choice, or like if you get angry at someone because they stole your seat and you get super angry at them, like is that wrong to get angry because that's just your natural reaction, or is it only wrong if you don't suppress that, but you like choose to,
Yeah, simply I would say the emotion itself, or even the temptation itself, is not the problem. It's what we do with it. And most of the times anger is not justified in terms of following up on it, okay? So I'm not trying to give you guys, or girls can get angry too, go out there and be angry. That's not the point I'm making. But we're going to see a little bit later that Job was pretty angry, and angry at God. And he lost a lot. I mean, he was way at the bottom, and he started way at the top. And that's something we're going to have to deal with his anger. I mean, temptation. Okay, guys, you notice a pretty girl. We see beauty. What do you do with that? Is the temptation to go further in your mind on that wrong? Yeah, if you're going to start playing around with it, sure. And if you're going to entertain that temptation. But the temptations, we can't avoid the thoughts that come into our minds, but we know we can do is chase away those thoughts, and that's our responsibility. So it's a little bit the same with any emotion. And certain ones can very quickly lead us to sin, more than others. Yeah. Good question. Anybody else? Okay, we go until 45?
15-minute break, then we start.
Okay. Let's see. So is God just? You're saying yes, Cooper. How do you know that? Have you always experienced justice in your life?
In the long run, I think often we can observe it, but we can't always observe it. I think some of that is us learning the Lord's characteristics through our relationship with Him and through Scripture. And I think we can see that through some of the stories He's provided for us to observe His justice and His sovereign will. But obviously His sovereign will we can't know until it has already occurred. So sometimes it's hard to observe His justice in our short lifespan.
So that's your head speaking, Cooper. How about your heart? Does your heart agree with your head when you're in the midst?
When I'm in the midst of a trial, I ask a lot of the questions that we were asking earlier. Why? You get angry, you can harbor some bitterness, things like that.
Yeah.
But I try to rely on that headspace to make sure I keep myself where I need to be.
Okay. How does that work for you?
Sometimes okay, sometimes not.
Okay. Our hearts don't always keep up with our heads, do they? And we can theorize and we can sit here in judgment over others based on our head knowledge without having the experience or knowing the experience that other person is going through. And we're going to find that out through Job's so-called friends. They were judging Job based on their head knowledge without the heart experience to show compassion to their suffering friend. Yes?
I just had a question. If there's a sovereign God who's just, right, who's purely just and purely sovereign, does that mean that the world that we live in has to be just?
Well, I think you're answering your own question. If you believe that God is sovereign and God is just, do you believe that?
Yeah, I would say so.
You would say so. Is this world operating according to justice in all instances?
I don't think so. So that's where I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm missing some piece of the puzzle.
I mean, that's the whole question of God's sovereignty and our responsibility. And I believe that both are true. You're responsible for your life and for the choices you make, and God is sovereign over this whole world. And how do those two fit together? I don't know, but I have to live in the tension between two truths that I cannot, in my mind, make fit perfectly. And that's okay for me to live in that tension. That's where God wants us to live. These issues that we discuss, and they're good issues that you discuss in Bible school, the traditional, is God sovereign? If he's totally sovereign, then how come, what do I have responsibility, all that stuff. Predestination, all those questions. They're great that you're discussing those. But in the end, they're not problems for us to fix. There's not a problem there between two truths. If two things are true, there's no problem there, except our limited capacity to understand how those two fit together. And God has certainly revealed himself to be perfectly satisfied with those, what we call paradoxes. And he wants us then to also be satisfied to live, as uncomfortable as it is, in that tension between two truths. And some of us are going to land more on the side of a person's responsibility, and some of us are going to land a little bit more on the side of God's sovereignty. And we're going to emphasize God is sovereign, God is sovereign, God is sovereign. Others, I'm responsible, I'm responsible, I'm responsible. And denominations are formed over those, where you end up on that spectrum. And if I ask the right questions here, there'd be some of you on one side and there'd be some of you on the other side, and some of you would try to stay in the middle. But it's not a matter of staying in the middle. It's a matter of living within that tension of God's truth. And it's hard. And Job is an example of that. And we don't get easy answers. But that's the safe place to live. Yep.
Isn't God's justice more about after we die? Isn't all things settled then?
His final justice, his final sovereignty, all of his perfections will be fully revealed. Well, I even hesitate to say that they'll be fully revealed in eternity, because I believe in eternity we're not going to be God, and we're going to still be learning.
Not revealed, but his justice will be done.
Right, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But not totally understood even by us, because I believe throughout eternity we're going to be learning, continuing to learn. You may not be seated in a class like this, but you're going to continue to learn about who God is. And
Isn't as when we become children of God by faith, the wrath of God is taken off of us, and that judgment is taken off of us. But those that are not are under his judgment. Isn't that, in a sense, his
yes, I mean, Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished." But there's still some mopping up to do. And we're still living on this earth. And by the way, I believe in eternity we'll be living on a renewed earth, so we're not going anywhere. We're not going up someplace. We're going to be here. But it's going to be a world where God reigns and there is no sin. But anyway, that's different topic, and we're going to really get on a rabbit trail there. So your original question was
It wasn't really a question, it was just a point that
a point.
is God's justice taken care of at the end of everybody's lives?
Yes. That's the short answer. Yeah. Okay, we got to move on, or we're not going to get there. Okay. Is suffering fair? In the hypothetical of your sibling being killed by a drunk driver, is that fair?
It's not fair in our minds, but in one sense, Jesus suffered and told us we would suffer as him.
So why should we be trying to put some kind of a nice spin on it?
Not saying
Can we just say it's just not fair?
I would think it would be not fair if.
I'm just pushing back on you a little bit.
I would think it would be not fair if Jesus suffered and we did not. Because he was perfect and we're not.
That's true. Very good point. But losing your child or your sibling, is that part of making up for the fact that Jesus suffered?
No, that's not the
No.
point.
That's right. Yeah. This is hard stuff. What should we do about if life isn't fair? Cry out to God? Oh, certainly. Should we be instruments of justice and of fairness? Should we be bringing justice into this world? Can we? Yeah.
I think if God chooses to use us as that instrument, yeah. You see, it seems like that's the case in the Old Testament a little bit. He kind of picks people to go and dish out justice.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not talking, vigilante type justice here, but just generally being instruments of God's justice, being just and fair in our life, in our dealings with people, where we have that opportunity. Just a thought there. Is life fair? And if so, why doesn't it feel like it? I'm not going to answer all these questions, but some for you to think about. And what about this one? Why do bad people, so-called, seem to get away with everything, while good people, so-called, always get the short end of the stick?
Your words are seen and always.
Yeah, I mean, that's a generality, but we tend to think in extremes like that. Oh, my brother never gets punished. I always get punished,
I think it's still your perspective. Is it just about your life here on earth, or is it your life in eternity?
Okay?
I would also say that bad people seem to get away with everything. That it is also here, which they might get material things, whereas like getting peace or like feeling good about themselves, like that is still a consequence that they'll have to live with.
Okay. Why do so-called good people get away with so much? Is the question I would ask myself. In Job 21, verse 7, he asks, this is in the Message version, why do the wicked have it so good? They have a long life on easy street and die painlessly in their sleep. That was his impression. And that tends to be our impression when we're down here. Life is not fair. God is not just. Others get away with everything, and I don't get away with anything. Our thoughts and our despair, our doubts are amplified down here. And that's why it's important, just a little rabbit trail here, that's why it's important when you're down here to remember when you were up there and to look forward to when God will bring you there. To gain some perspective down here, you have to have your eyes on these 2 points up here. Because our life, the life of the Christian, is not a life that just goes straight up like that. God has designed our lives to be a life that goes like this. Remember the U-shaped story? We are living out the life of Jesus over and over and over again. And it's God who's leading us through the ups and downs. And it's to, to show his glory in the ups and in the downs. It's to image Christ in the U-shape of his story. And it's to give us perspective and to keep our eyes focused on him when he comes to us on the mountaintop. And for many of you, right now, this is a mountaintop experience for you, where you feel really close to God. Wait till you go home. And you don't have your friends here. And you don't have everybody else, worshiping God and reading their Bible and singing to him. And you're going to try to explain to your friends and to your parents and to your family, oh, it was so great there on Kauai. And they're going to say, yeah, interesting. And they will not be able to enter into what you have gone through. Wait till that happens. Are you prepared for that? Job, I think, is going to, again, help us get some perspective on life and prepare ourselves for when it's not going to be a mountaintop anymore. And sometimes those periods can be very long and very dreary. Okay, one last point here. Well, it's 9:45. Okay, that's a lot of stuff for you to digest. We haven't even gotten into the book, and we'll do that when we get back. Yeah. You can take your full 15 minutes. I heard Dan say, I only gave them 10 minutes. He was proud of that. But do what you want. We'll see you back.